Welcome to the Advanced Freelancing Podcast. Every week, you'll hear strategies for building your online service-based business your way. And now, here's your host, veteran freelancer, author, and TEDx speaker, Laura Briggs.
Hi, everyone. I'm here with another guest on the Advanced Freelancing Podcast. And today we're switching things up a little bit. Let's think about what your clients want you to know before you're pitching them and while you're working with them. So today, to share the perspective of what it's like to be a client who hires freelancers, my guest is Anthony Park. Anthony, welcome to the show. And why don't you tell us a little bit about you?
Hey, Laura, thanks for having me. Sure. I'm a executor and attorney. And what that means is I have legal work, of course, that requires some specialized skills. But for those of you who don't know what an executor is, I'm the person who helps settle the final affairs of somebody who's passed away. And that can be as untechnical as cleaning out a deceased person's apartment, taking the cable box back to the service center, dealing with a lot of mail, insurance claims, closing bank accounts. Even taking a car to the DMV or the plates, very, very, very nitty gritty stuff like that. And I also have several self-published books and a podcast and YouTuber just like you. So I do have a lot of freelancers who I work with for those projects as well. So I've gone so far as hiring virtual paralegals to all the way, I guess not down, but to on the other end of the spectrum as working with Fiverr freelancers on a very one-off basis. So I've kind of covered the whole spectrum. I've been very heavily outsourced, I'd say, for the past almost 10 years. I just love the notion of outsourcing and avoiding the overhead of full employment. So I am pretty experienced in working with a whole broad spectrum of freelancers.
Which is kind of the ideal situation for a freelancer, because sometimes our clients don't know how to interact with us effectively. And it's always a breath of fresh air when you come across somebody who has done this before and kind of knows how to do that effectively as far as screening freelancers and working with them. Most of my clients have been attorneys. And so that's why I thought it's especially interesting that we should dive in and talk about this. So sometimes freelancers don't realize the mistakes that they're making that could be problematic from the client standpoint. So why don't we dive into, we have these 5 things that your clients want you to know. Let's talk about the first one. And I believe that you've got that as that the time of the client is more important than money. So can you explain a little bit about how that influences who you hire and who you work with?
So yeah, sure. Think about it. If an attorney or a client has gotten to the point where they're trying to offload work, if they're trying to offload tasks, that means they've reached the inflection point where their time is more precious than the marginal dollar that's coming in. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
So you need to make sure that you are saving your attorney or your client time. And what that means, that can be in the form of, kind of not asking too many questions. I mean, we love questions, but you need to get it, Otherwise, we can't handhold that much. Otherwise, what was the point? Maybe in the beginning. And just, minimize the number of back and forth. It is a delicate balance because, you can't read minds, but you need to understand your attorney or your client as quickly as possible and minimize those back and forths going forward. I hate to sound so brusque about it, but there is a sort of cost benefit analysis from our point of view. And if we are constantly revising or having to slack 10 times for one task, it begins to look less and less like a good proposition for us.
Yeah, absolutely. So it is that fine balance because you've got to get enough information from the client as the freelancer to be able to start working. But there is such a thing as kind of asking too many questions, because then the client starts to think, okay, well, if I have to walk them through every single aspect of this process, maybe this isn't saving me the time that I need. And so even if they're really good at doing the task, it still required me to, get on a screen share with them and walk them through how to use WordPress. And if you're a developer, or virtual assistant, or a writer, that's a skill you should already have, is doing something that's relatively basic. And you should just be checking in with the client for their specific guidelines rather than saying like, hey, I need you to teach me this entire process, if you've made it clear that that's something that you know beforehand for sure.
You brought up a great point there about screencasting, and I think that's a two-way street.
Mm-hmm.
So the great thing about videos or screencasting is that they are asynchronous, meaning you don't have to be on at the same time, whether it's a live stream or a video chat or a phone call, because again, time is precious. Not only the amount of time, but blocking off scheduled time to speak with your freelancers. So if you can make that asynchronous, meaning if you have a question that's a bit too detailed for a Slack or text or email, but again, you don't want to be constantly bogging down your client or an attorney with I need 5 minutes on the phone, then record a 2 or 3 minute screencast explaining what you don't quite understand or what you think the potential solutions are and which one do you want me to go with, A, B, or C? And I can just watch that on my phone when
Right.
I'm online at the grocery or online at court. And let's be more professional here.
Yeah.
Then yeah, that's huge because that's a lot different. It feels a lot different than are you free at 2:15 for a 10-minute call? If that. I'm not sure I'm a New Yorker, so I'm very, very time sensitive. I'm not sure if everyone else feels that way.
Well, I think a lot of entrepreneurs and service provider, your attorneys, your business people, they all think very similarly in that way. And so you might think as a freelancer that you're being super thorough by saying, here are the 47 questions I have about this project. Having been on the other side of that, outsourcing some of my own work, as business owners, we have to make a lot of decisions daily. So please don't give us too many decisions to make when it's not really necessary. I think part of the purpose in outsourcing, at least with non-low level tasks, so your higher level tasks, is to take some of that decision-making pressure off of me. So if I give an assignment to one of my virtual assistants, hey, we need webinar software, go find the best 3 solutions, and then based on what you know about me and how I use webinars, make a recommendation for the best one. So I don't want to get a spreadsheet back that has 15 different options and no decision making within there, because then that just creates more work for me. And it's more time that the VA spent on it. It's more time I have to spend sorting through it. And so think about that too. What is your client's preferred communication channel? How can you show up effectively? And like I tell all of my subcontractors, do not email me. It will get lost. Like it has to come through Voxer or I'm not seeing it. So these are good points to remember when you're first speaking with a client. Ask that question. What is the most effective way for me to be able to communicate with you? So let's chat a little bit about the second point, which is good is better than fast. Can you explain a little bit more about what you mean by that?
Sure. I first experienced this working with Fiverr freelancers for the most part, where if you browse Fiverr or if you've posted on Fiverr as a freelancer and you checked out your competition, you'll see that a lot of the touting or the branding is, fastest response time. I will get this, thumbnail back to you within 7 hours, or I will edit your book within 24 hours, which to me doesn't sound like it would be a very good edit job. But, so there's a lot of emphasis on speed, and speed is good, within a certain bound. But if that speed results in me having to go back to you, you haven't really achieved the speed that you thought you were. So I saw that first with Fiverr, and I quickly learned not to necessarily go with who was the fastest, but perhaps the right balance between speed and what looks like it will be done correctly the first time, or at least a very good version the first time. And this doesn't just apply to Fiverr or Elance or Upwork. I've worked with virtual paralegals in the past, where they took great pride in sort of instantaneously. So I would send an email saying, please draft this response letter to client A. And it would be out the door within 20 minutes. And there was no typos or anything, but in some circumstances you want a little bit more. It doesn't feel like the paralegal thought about the tone or the, what's the appropriate response. And it sometimes came through. It came through that it was a sort of a hurried job. So sometimes it does, you do want to have a little bit of deliberateness. And again, that might depend on the style of the attorney or client that you're working with. But anyway, yeah. So there are many, many, many circumstances where the quality of the work is, which is much more important than the speed, and speed might actually translate into taking longer if there's going to be too much back and forth and corrections. Yeah.
Right. And I think this probably comes up on the freelancer side in the form of deadlines. A lot of times the clients are asking us, well, what is a reasonable deadline for this? Because it might be different for the client, right? Like if you're an attorney who can whip this stuff up very quickly, your expectation might be that it only takes 20 minutes because when you've had to do those tasks yourself, that's how you've limited yourself to it. But part of the reason, as we mentioned with point number one, is that this person is getting time back by outsourcing. And so when you give yourself more room to check things for errors, a lot of times, especially if it's something with writing or like road mapping a marketing plan or something that requires a lot of thinking and strategy, I will pad my deadline so that I have time to make that rough draft and then not touch it for a day or two and come back with fresh eyes and look at it again. So you need to possibly explain to your client that that's why you're doing that. When I get off the phone with someone and I'm writing up a proposal and it's a more complicated proposal, I'll tell them, you will hear from me the day after tomorrow. I'm going to let our notes sit for now. I'm going to draft it, tomorrow, and then you'll get it the next day once I've had a chance to refine it. That just kind of clues the client into your process. And yeah, a lot of times, especially if, you're working on a flat rate project, it's very tempting to be like, well, let me get this done as quickly as possible. Like I can cross this off my to-do list and send it off to the client and they'll be happy. But for a lot of people, quality really matters. So make sure that you explain that to your client and your overall process and make some extra time within that process so that you have the opportunity to review things and make sure that they're done very well, especially if it's an individual business owner, because they have a brand that they're representing and they want to be portrayed in a certain way. So rushed work usually isn't a thing unless your client has specifically told you, yes, we just need to get these things done and get it out the door. And it doesn't need to be perfect,
So you mentioned something that I would like to touch on.
Yeah.
I understand the cognitive pull, the desire to check off, cross it off your to-do list. So, or to keep a zero inbox if that's your style. So there's a really cool tool in Gmail that I have fallen in love with this past year called Scheduled Send. I don't know if you use that.
Oh, I have not. No.
It's awesome. So you can compose. So let's say you get an email from a client and you compose your reply, but you don't. If you click send, there's an option where you get a drop down and you can do a scheduled send. And you can schedule it for, let's say, 9 a.m. tomorrow morning or 5 p.m. that afternoon, whatever works out to give you the amount of time to sit on it. And this is different than saving as draft, because if you save as draft, this is so technical, but this is so nitty gritty. But as save as draft, if you do a save as draft, you have to remember to hit send again later. Right?
Yes.
That creates one more sort of mental burden on you. Whereas if you do a scheduled send for, let's say, tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., you do have that opportunity to sleep on it. And if you have the time to re-review it before it goes out at 9 a.m. in the morning. But if you don't, then you still won't miss your deadline. That draft will go out. Right.
Right.
And another reason I love this is because it helps you avoid that sort of rapid fire back and forth emailing. Have you ever been in that cycle where, a client emails you, and in the interest of getting back quickly or checking it off your to-do list, you reply, promptly. And then guess what happens next? The client writes right back. So you spend like an hour going, ping-ponging back and forth. Whereas if you want to get it off your mind and compose your reply, but then schedule it for an hour or two later, then you can kind of avoid that ping-ponging. So anyway, that's my little thing. I just love that feature.
No, I can see how beneficial that is. I use a similar tool called Boomerang. I'm going to have to check out the one you recommended though now, because I definitely, I use Boomerang a lot. And I think it's very beneficial, especially if you are working night or weekend hours. And maybe you don't want your client to know that, or get in the habit of thinking like, oh, Laura's available on Saturdays, so I can email her or possibly call her on Saturdays to do work. So if I am putting in weekend hours and I don't really want anyone to know it, or if I finished a client's proposal at 10 o'clock at night, I might schedule that to go out in the morning so that it seems like it kind of hits their inbox first thing in the morning. So I love those kinds of tools. And I like the fact that you can think about it and go, okay, you know what? I said this one line in there. I'm not sure that's going to come across the right way, or maybe I want to look this over one more time before I send it. And I think that's a great way to do it.
It's also a good way, sorry to keep harping on this, but I just love this tool. It's also a good way to avoid what I call Friday afternoon email bombing. People have this habit of just want to clear their desks on Friday afternoon, just to feel good on the weekend. But the result, you selfish person, is that you are, you are like carpet bombing somebody else's inbox right before the weekend. So what I do for my paralegals or all the virtual freelancers I work with, I don't want to be that guy who's, just inundating you on a late Friday afternoon. So for me, I empty my inbox by composing stuff on Friday afternoon, but I schedule it to hit their inbox Monday morning. Otherwise, they're going to be stuck thinking about it, or we're going to be stuck in a ping pong over the weekend, which I hate.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So think about how you might even be doing that to your clients as well. I know one of the things that used to drive me crazy is I got the version of that as a freelancer where a bunch of clients would ask for meetings or last minute stuff on Friday to be delivered the following week. And it does create stress because then you're like, oh crap, now I've got 3 more projects and this person wants to have a call on Tuesday. So let me go look at my calendar for Tuesday. Can we do that? So try to clear that stuff up maybe a day or two before, or wait until you can send it on Monday. So I love that a lot. This podcast episode is sponsored by my course, The Guide to Killing It on Upwork. Inside the course, you'll learn all my secret tips and tricks for how to search for jobs, find the right clients, have an amazing profile that attracts people to work with you before they even know you, and how to write a killer pitch that gets your clients' attention and stands you way above the competition. If you're interested in learning more about how to enroll in this course, check out tinyurl.com/guide to Upwork course. So one of the big challenges that freelancers face is that there's more and more and more of us. And so your point number 3 is know your competition. So what do you recommend that freelancers keep in mind with regard to that?
So this one is kind of a trick point, because what I mean by your competition is not necessarily just other freelancers, which is key. But so first, look at other freelancers within the whole spectrum. It could be other virtual freelancers. It could be other in-office freelancers, and it can range all the way down to freelancers who are on marketplace sites like Fiverr or Upwork. But not only that, make sure you're comparing yourself to what other solutions are available to your client or attorney. And that could be software, right? That could be a chatbot. That could be AI. That could be Canva, if you're doing graphic design. It could be anything. So just make sure that what you're offering or the experience that you're offering for your client or attorney in some way, shape, or form is more advantageous to them than the alternative. Because if you have a attorney, or I keep saying attorney just because that's my thing. If you have a client who is a little bit more, let's say they know how to use what is it, Photoshop? I don't know, InDesign, one of the right. Adobe suites. Yeah. Then you kind of know you can't really charge them that premium for that kind of service, because what you're really offering them is to save them the time of actually sitting in front of the computer. And you're not saving them the time of learning how to use Adobe. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. And so you cannot always compete directly against a lot of these like software programs. So if you're a graphic designer and your client has the perception that Canva is just something super easy that they can do on their own, you can't show them that Canva isn't a thing, or that Canva doesn't work, or it's not effective. It's all about how you pitch yourself and the services that you provide. So maybe that's going and looking at some of the things they have made in their own Canva account and kind of pointing out how those could be more effective. Or if the person bought a set of templates that 10 other businesses are also using those exact identical templates and pinning them on Pinterest or sharing them on social, it kind of creates a branding problem. And so you have to be able to bring up those concerns as well. I mean, I know as a writer, a lot of times I'd come up against attorneys who say, oh yeah, well, I can just work with someone who does like article spinning. They just do software where it like takes someone else's work and regurgitates it in new words so that it's seen as unique by the internet. And so something that I used to do is I would actually use one of those article spinning softwares, and I hired someone on Fiverr to write a 500-word SEO article. It was $5. The only use I ever got out of that article is I teach a course on how to be a proofreader, and that is the test assignment for people in my class, because it is so poorly written that I'm like, here, y'all can have this. I spent $5 on it. It is complete garbage. So think about that too. Like, your client might have the perception, like maybe they've heard that something else is easier or cheaper. You've got to be the one to position yourself as, yes, that maybe it is cheaper, and maybe for some people it is easier. Here's why me doing it and me coming to the table to do it is going to be a little bit different. And so sometimes there is that educational piece of it, but always know your competition. And I feel like every couple of months I hear someone say freelancing is dead, like there's no more opportunities anymore, the market is saturated. So don't know your competition in that sense of like just being convinced that you're going to be run out of business. You can always find a unique way to position yourself, but you should know what else is out there. I think it also helps you pivot as a freelancer, if you see that a new software has been developed that can do your job, you might need to consider a new service area or think about how you can learn that software or be better than what it does. So always be mindful of what else is out there in the market. So
I remember when transcription was a big thing, and then Rev just kind of took over. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And so you have to see those things coming down the pike, right? Like as an SEO content writer, I've been watching all of the stuff around how people are using voice search because it's going to change the way that people Google things. They're doing it from some of these voice activated, devices like Alexa. And so that might change how I need to write for my clients to be effective because I have to think about how people are speaking instead of writing. So just be aware of your competition and even things out there that could potentially change the way that you do business. And you're absolutely right about Rev. That used to be a big thing where you'd have to go find a person who had done like medical or legal transcription before and had the software to do it. And now it's like, I have the Rev app on my phone. Like I can upload it and get a copy of my document back in 30 minutes or less. And so as a transcriptionist, you've got to think about how can you pivot yourself around that. For me, I work with a transcriptionist as well, and she is in a completely different time zone. So I upload my files every day, and the next morning they're all delivered. And where she gets the edge over a company like Rev is that I have trained her with my verbal cues about how to place subheaders. She knows where to place commas properly. She knows how to do my bulleted list. So there's a lot of formatting time that she's saving me, and that I don't want to pay Rev extra to do that, or I don't feel like their transcriptionists don't know me. It's assigned to a random person. This transcriptionist knows me and my content and how to spell the things I talk about frequently. So you can still position yourself even when there are other solutions out there. So let's talk a little bit about tip number 4, which is you have to be turnkey. Tell me more about that.
So this one has driven me crazy in the past. So going back to my first point, that the whole reason why attorneys and clients are coming to you is because we have reached the inflection point where our time is more valuable than the marginal dollar. If you approach me and say, oh yeah, I can do and this is a very attorney-centric example, but I can do your estate tax returns. I have experience doing that. I just need you to provide me with the software, a login, and and this, that, and the other. You have created work for me. So it's in that particular scenario, it was much easier for me to find a similarly experienced paralegal who is just, give me the file and I will produce the tax returns for you. I don't need you to purchase a license for me or this, that, and the other. I'm sure there's other examples. That's the one that comes to mind. Don't put it on your client to be your IT department or or anything else. The whole point of me coming to a freelancer is to not have to bear the overhead cost, both in terms of money and in terms of mental stress of hiring and training somebody. I think that makes sense.
Yeah, it absolutely does make sense. And that, I think, gets to this other idea of deciding when something should be an email versus a call, because you don't want that email ping pong back and forth, right? Like if it's something that is more urgent and it's like, hey, I'm locked out of this account, I need you to resend me the password through LastPass or Dashlane, fine. But if you have like 4 or 5 questions, don't necessarily list them out in an email. If that person does have time, make them the screencast video or set up a 10-minute call, like literally make it a 10 or 15-minute call so that it's very clear, like, hey, these are the 5 things I want to go over just really quickly. I want to make sure we're on the same page. Don't create more work for them. Like it is my nightmare when someone sends me an email that has like 10 questions in it that they then want me to type out the answers to. And it's like, listen, I'm a writer. I already type all day. I don't need more of that. So I will purposely just record a file in Rev and upload it to Dropbox and be like, here's my response. It's 1.5 minutes or 2 minutes. So that I don't have to type that out. So be aware of how much extra work you're potentially creating for your clients. And I think this kind of goes into our 5th point here about leveling up to being a trusted advisor, because ideally, the longer that you're working with a client, the more you know them and the more you can kind of do some of that extra research ahead of time. Like I have a great executive assistant now, and she, I brought her on to do all kinds of different tasks, but now she knows my business well enough where she can say, listen, we went back and forth about the logo. I just went ahead and created the branding guide for it. I stored it in Dropbox if we ever need to outsource to someone else. Doing that extra step of just, hey, I'm already creating the colors and everything for the logo and storing the logo in all its different formats. Here's the branding guide. It's already been completed and done. Then I have a chance to review it, but I'm not necessarily being asked, well, what should we put on the branding guide? And can you find me an example of someone else's that looks really good? It's like, take that ball and run with it a little bit. Once you know the client, you can go a little bit further. I know one thing that I did recently, I work with a number of estate planning attorneys. And when everything hit with the pandemic, I reached out to them and said, hey, I want to do a blog on your website specifically about how your clients can work with you right now. So not just the general FAQs that people ask about estate planning, but right now, what are the things that your office is offering? What are the questions that you're getting, about remote notarization, if your state allows that? And that allowed for a very personal thing from them where they could just respond with a couple of bullet points or direct me to the internal office memo that they distributed to their now remote employees about how things are going to work. And I could repurpose that into a blog post. And that was super helpful for them to be able to get that information out in another channel, but it also wasn't asking a lot more work from them. So the longer that you get to know a client, the easier it is to think one step ahead of them. And so I'd love to hear more about what you think it means to kind of level up to being a trusted advisor with a client.
So your examples are spot on. Just building up the relationship to the point where you can, and the style, brand, and needs of your attorney, and you can really almost anticipate, pretty much anticipate the needs and sort of even think on their behalf, which is awesome. I'll just add another example. You want to be a resource because you presumably work with several attorneys or other clients, so you kind of have a better marketplace view of what's out there. So for example, I recently wanted to start doing wills again, which I don't, estate plans, which I don't often do. But, as you probably know, one of the major issues is, scrounging around for witnesses and notaries for the signings. It's just kind of a pain. So my paralegal, Janice, who's wonderful, who works with other New York estate planning attorneys, pointed out that, hey, the City Bar Association has this conference room that's specifically for that. And they have witnesses and notaries there just basically on demand. And you get this sort of ambiance and, the feel of a columned and serious looking leather bound building. So that was great that she was not just there to write letters and scan my mail, but she understood what I was trying to do and spoke up on behalf of, or based on her knowledge from other clients, on her knowledge of the marketplace, which was just awesome for me.
Right. And you might, if you're kind of at the beginning of your freelance journey, you might be thinking, well, I don't have enough experience yet to be able to do that. That's fine. Work in some of the service areas where there isn't a ton of back and forth. Maybe, you start off as a virtual assistant doing specifically task-based things. But if you want to deliver a better experience to your clients and ultimately charge a little bit more, stepping into that role of strategic advisor gives you that opportunity. And it really helps you design what is going to work for the client. I've had several clients where, they wanted to pick out the blog titles for every single time that we wrote something on their website, which is fine. But if I could push back a little bit with them and say, hey, I really think based on my own keyword research, something I'm seeing that's working really well, like let's say Memorial Day weekend is coming up and I'm working with a personal injury attorney. Let's do something around the fact that kicks off the 100 deadliest days of the year with regard to car accidents, or the fact that people might be out drinking, or something specific. So when you can make an extra recommendation, your client starts to rely on you and values your opinion more, and it makes it a little bit easier to have that long-term relationship because they see you as invested in their business as well.
For sure. I was recently planning a direct mail campaign, and again, Janice, my paralegal, pointed out she had done that for some dentists and other attorneys recently, and the ROI was pretty poor. So that really helped me avoid a spend that I otherwise would have sunk some ad dollars in. So that was really great.
Right. And don't be afraid to speak up and say that. Like, your client can still have the final decision-making power over doing a particular thing, but you speaking up could help them now and possibly in the future. I've had that with a couple of clients as well, where they were colleagues from law school and they wanted to post the same blog on both of their sites. And so I kind of explained to them, like, we could do this. It's not great. This is why we shouldn't do it. And I'm going to warn you multiple times if you do decide to do it that we should change this in the future. And so ultimately they decided to do it anyways. But I had voiced my concerns, and I had put those in writing so that it would be easier. Like if anyone ever came back and was like, oh, my site isn't showing up because of duplicate content, I could kind of reiterate that point. But I think it is, you've got to feel that with your clients to some extent. I tell all of my subcontractors that. I say, if there's a process in place that you think is terrible, if we're doing something that isn't getting, isn't leading to any purpose or generating more money or helping serve my clients and community more effectively, challenge it. Like, tell me, hey, why are we doing this? I think we can drop this, or I think there's a better way to do this. Because like I mentioned before, as decision makers and business owners, we already have to make so many choices during the day that sometimes we just get into a rut of like, well, these are the things we do and this is how we do it. And having someone with fresh perspective challenge it, you can either walk them through why you made that decision as a client and why that exists, or you can say, you know what, that's interesting. Let's actually pursue what that looks like to potentially change it or abandon that process that isn't really, bringing in what we had hoped in terms of ROI. So I'd love to know, is there one mistake perhaps that you've seen freelancers make over and over, or before you've hired them? Maybe it's been the reason you didn't hire them, that it's kind of to close things out, avoid this mistake, and you could have much more effective relationships with your clients.
So I can't. This feels so obvious, and it feels like insulting to bring it up, but I'm just, I guess it's the cleanest example I can think of. When you apply or respond to a job posting or a request for services, a RFP, I'm not sure what it's called, answer the questions that I'm asking. So often it's just very obvious that it was a form, mass response that is not specific to what I was looking for. If I ask, do you have experience with Canva or with TubeBuddy or whatever the case may be, and you respond, I am great at YouTube, blah, 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 you don't answer my question, you're immediately going to the circular file cabinet, as they say. So just, I understand it's a numbers game sometimes, but you got to put in that work then and really respond to the requests and needs of what I'm looking for. Otherwise, it's not it doesn't bode well for the work that you'll be doing for me in the future.
Absolutely. And it really doesn't take that much extra time to add a little bit of personalization into it, such as answering yes or no to a specific question, right? Like copying and pasting your template in. I mean, I use Google Forms for this a lot when I'm hiring someone new, because to me, it's a test of laziness. If you're not even willing to click on the Google form and fill out the 4 questions that I asked and rate yourself with regard to how well you know a certain software or process, that tells me a lot, right? Like we're not going to gel well together. So that also tells me you don't want to follow instructions if you instead send me a private message on Facebook when I've specifically said, please don't do that. Please go to the Google form to apply. So I think a lot of people, especially when they're starting out with freelancing, are like, oh, well, I just need to pitch like 20 clients a day. So it doesn't matter. Just let me get out these 20 pitches. I've got this templated thing. I'm copying and pasting into everything. No one responds well to that, and especially as things get more competitive. I just posted a job yesterday for something, and over 100 virtual assistants applied for this one-time gig within a matter of like 30 minutes. And so you've got to stand out. Otherwise, it gets really overwhelming for the client. And if there's 50 people who apply who all say the same thing, I've been a VA for 2 years, I'm great at what I do, I like doing data entry and research. As a client, I have no way to tell, like, how is number 1 different from number 50? You all say the same thing. So it comes down to what you don't want it coming down to as a freelancer, which is price. And given many things that look very similar, a client will just probably go with the cheapest option, or more likely they're going to hire the person who put in that personalization. So take the extra effort to make it a little bit personalized. It's probably going to take you 15 to 30 seconds, but it is well worth the investment. Well, thank you.
It's also, if you don't answer the question properly, you're probably not qualified for that particular job also.
Yeah, exactly. Like the client is asking that for a reason. And if they're asking 15 questions, that's your red flag as a freelancer. Like, hey, this person is really detail oriented, or this is a really complicated process. So I should know that and maybe say, if I don't want to work with somebody like that, that's fine. But don't just answer one question or be really generic and say, not apply, see above, whatever. Take that extra time to fill it out. Well, this has been extremely helpful for my audience. I know I've learned a lot from it. So thank you so much for coming on the show. Where can people go to learn a little bit more about you?
Oh, my website is anthonyspark.com. And you can also just look up Anthony Park on Amazon for my series of